You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 20th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio.
The World Economic Forum is gearing up to start tomorrow. We'll check in with our woman in Davos. But how much does it really matter, given that a man who's vowed to upend everything has taken power in the US today? We'll be in Washington to get a feel for Donald Trump's inauguration. I'm Georgina Godwin. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you live from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guests Patricia Cohen and Vincent McAviney will discuss the day's big stories. Plus, we'll be joined by Carlota Rebelo in Davos and Chris Cermak in Washington. Stay tuned. All that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Georgina Godwin. Well, first, we're joined by my co-host today, Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, Carlota Rebelo. She's in Davos, where the 2025 World Economic Forum officially kicks off today. Carlota, if we think it's cold here, I expect we've got nothing on where you are.
Well, yes, it is indeed colder than London, but not as cold as previous editions of the World Economics Forum annual meeting. I can guarantee we're not getting the minus 12 like we did last year. But the snow is still present, and the slightly warmer but still chilly temperatures mean it's just a bit easier to get around, Georgina. And when you are, flying from London with a radio studio and need to set it up, I'm actually quite glad.
I'm quite sure you are. So, Carlota, is it less chilly in atmosphere too? What's the mood like? What's happening?
Yes, you can definitely sense a bit of a quieter Monday than usual. As you mentioned, the program officially begins tomorrow, so Mondays tend to be a bit quieter always. The official program, it's the Crystal Awards, always on a Monday evening, which is the World Economic Forum's awards for humanitarian work to three people, three celebrities or renowned people, and then also the official welcoming reception. The program proper only starts on the Tuesday, but even by usual accounts, it is a bit quieter. And I don't know if Donald Trump has a hand to play in that by distracting a lot of people and getting people away to the inauguration. What I will say, though, is that yesterday, the Sunday, was quite busy and busier than expected here. A lot of people, particularly journalists, tend to travel on a Sunday so that it's a bit quieter and we can set up and get our credentials and everything in place. And because there was some protests on the way, it meant it took a bit longer to get here because of road blockages for those traveling by car. And it's almost like everyone had the same idea. So it was actually quite a bit busy yesterday compared to today. But now, as we get to the end of the day here, we have definitely seen an increase in the influx of people. And the mood is very much getting ready for what's ahead.
What is ahead? What's on everybody's mind for discussion?
Today there was only one thing in everyone's mind, and that was the inauguration. Several events happening that just wrapped up now or are still underway with inauguration watch parties. Scattered either not in anything official from the WEF program, but on the unofficial side at the houses that are on the promenade or at some of the restaurants and cafes. Now, what is also interesting to see, of course, the theme being collaboration in the intelligent age, it is inevitable not to talk about AI and the impact that technology is having in society in general. And one of the points that the annual meeting wants to bring home and that wants to talk about over the course of the next couple of days is this idea of how to harness these new technologies to help strengthen social and economic resilience. We are seeing increase in presence of CEOs and directors of tech-related companies here at Davos. They are more and more the key players that people and governments and officials want to engage with. So how do we bring those two aspects and those two worlds together with this idea of collaboration? And, at a time of great global uncertainty, probably mostly driven by the geopolitical tensions that we are seeing and this fragmentation in terms of economies, it is important to see how technology can be used in a positive way. Also on climate change, we cannot ignore that. It doesn't go away. And the latest global risks report released by WEF just a couple of days ago still has climate change as one of the top risks of the year.
You mentioned the houses. Just recap what those are and what can you tell us about them? Is it a busy promenade this year?
Yes, so along the promenade, that is the main thoroughfare here in Davos, you'll find houses. And these are sort of pavilions taken over by private companies, but also by governments that have kind of an unofficial side program to WEF. So each of these houses will not only have spaces to facilitate meetings and either representatives of that government and that country or members of that company will be there to meet other people and network, but most of them also have their own side programs. So they'll have mini panels combining both people who are accredited and attending the Congress Center and people who are of relevance and prominent who are on the outside. So you get this kind of almost informal formal setting outside where it's open to the general public. Anyone can pop in and you get to have these really amazing conversations. And the houses, of course, it's an expensive affair to do. So it's also a good way of sensing who's investing big each year. As no surprise, I mentioned that earlier, we still see a big rise in the houses related to technology, but we're also seeing a big presence from the Middle East increased. For example, just yesterday, we were still seeing the final touches being put up for the Oman house. The Emirati house was today, again, one of the most popular ones with the cold weather because they always hand out some hot treats, either hot chocolate or a hot beverage, which is very much appreciated. And you also have Saudi Arabia with a big presence here and Qatar. So there is a big push for the Middle East. And a debut this year, we have USA House, which interestingly is the one of, I'm going to say the only one, at least of the ones I've seen. So I might be wrong. So one of the few that does not have the name written on it. So it doesn't say what it is. It doesn't say the USA House. It just has a bald eagle and the Star-Spangled Banner, and that should suffice, Georgina. And let's stay in the US because, as we were saying, Trump's inauguration has been the main topic of conversation here in Davos. The watch parties have just wrapped up, but Monocle senior news editor Chris Cermak is on the line from Washington, D.C., indeed fresh off the inauguration. Chris, what are your first impressions so far?
Well, hello, Carlota. Yes, I am here live. The inauguration and the speech wrapped up just around 20 minutes ago. I'm at an institution kind of in the city called Carmine's. It's an Italian restaurant, which is a sign of just how much things changed over here, given the frigid weather outside. Basically, you had a whole bunch of Trump supporters who did not manage to get into the official inauguration or the overflow in the Capitol arena, and we're just looking for anywhere to watch it. And this was one of the places, it is something of an institution here in D.C., that there was a large gathering. So first impressions that I would say is just the sort of celebratory atmosphere that you have here among Trump supporters. The speech went down very, very well. In terms of what Donald Trump said, I can tell you throughout, there was a lot of cheering. He hit a lot of his high points. I think maybe one of the things that was interesting compared to, say, 2017 and his speech then was that he was extremely confident. He kind of knew really what he wanted to say. You really get the sense that Donald Trump is coming into this presidency with a very clear agenda and also a very clear difference, and making that difference extremely clear. Somebody I spoke to here said that it was the Joe Biden roast, as they called it as well, because it really did focus on this contrast between his impressions of the Biden administration for the last 4 years and his own. And to that point, let's have one little clip about just how dramatically he says that things are going to change.
My recent election is a mandate to completely and totally reverse a horrible betrayal and all of these many betrayals that have taken place, and to give the people back their faith their wealth, their democracy, and indeed their freedom. From this moment on, America's decline is over.
Chris, you said that Trump supporters are celebrating, but of course we know almost half the country does not believe that he should be president or is not happy about it. Are you getting a sense of that kind of mood, or is Washington just packed with supporters?
To be honest, Georgina, you get no sense of that mood. I mean, it has been incredibly striking being here over the last few days, because as soon as you leave the center, and I think you can hear some singing behind me, as soon as you leave the center, I mean, Washington is relatively quiet. It is pretty dead. Even taking the metro into the city, it is extremely quiet, because basically Washingtonians, the liberal side of Washington, if you will, the Democrats, those who are disappointed in this election result, they are not here. They're either staying entirely at home. It's obviously cold anyway, but aside from that, it's also cold in terms of politically for them. So you don't hear much from them at all. There was protests on Saturday. There are a few very small scattered protests today in a couple of parts of the city, but really this city has been completely taken over, Georgina, by Donald Trump's supporters. And yes, that is quite a striking thing to see, given that Washington, D.C. itself is actually very heavily Democratic.
What has he said already regarding policies? He made a couple of very strong declarations.
He did make a number of strong declarations in his speech, aside from these general comments about America's decline being over, as you heard in the clips there. One other thing I'd say is it was interesting that he focused on this being a diverse coalition that elected him. He talked about even striving to make Martin Luther King's dream a reality, given that today is also Martin Luther King Day. When it comes to his actual policies, there were a number of things he listed, particularly started with immigration. He talked about declaring an emergency on the southern border, designating cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, eliminating all foreign gangs in the United States, sending troops to the southern border in order to protect the border. All of this, I would say, was somewhat expected, but nonetheless quite stark when you hear this compared to Joe Biden also sitting right behind him. He talked about defeating inflation, although didn't go into much detail. He talked about drill, baby, drill, that line that Republicans have used for a long time, ending mandates for electric vehicles, allowing people to buy a car of their choice, allowing more drilling in Alaska. He talked about an overhaul of the trade system, tariffs and taxing foreign countries, creating an external revenue service, as he called it, which got one of the louder cheers here in the bar. He also talked about bringing back free speech to America. There would be executive orders related to that. Another interesting one for me from the legacy, if you will, of the last few years that we tend to forget about. He talked about giving full back pay to anyone who did not get a job or lost their job as a result of the vaccine mandate in the pandemic. That also got a big cheer here. He also got a very big cheer for mandating that there are two genders. This is also something that has been something throughout his campaign and for Republicans, an extremely big issue. And finally, I think interesting on the foreign policy front, he did not focus on it quite as much, but he did sort of, as he has done before when it comes to foreign policy, he is the isolationist, president, something that would have been left-leaning in the past compared to Republican presidents like George W. Bush, who was also in the audience. He talked about measuring military success by the wars that we end and the wars that we never get into. And he called himself a peace president, referencing the Gaza ceasefire, this being the only time that Joe Biden also stood up to clap, showing that really there was no particular unity between these two presidents other than a ceasefire in Gaza. So really just an extremely stark set of differences that Donald Trump already laid out in just about a 30-minute speech.
Yeah. And Chris, just briefly before we go, I know you were at Obama's inauguration. I wonder how not only the atmosphere compares, but also the wardrobe with the Republicans in office. Are we seeing more Stetsons, more big hair?
More big hair, yes, certainly. I mean, it is quite a contrast. I mean, obviously, I think what struck me most when you talk about the contrast is the diversity, whether it's on stage or in the crowds. That has to be said, despite the fact that Donald Trump has talked about having a diverse coalition that obviously compared not at all to Barack Obama's in 2008. that was also, of course, I think the other thing that struck me was just the tone of the speech back in the time of Barack Obama. Obviously, he was the president who talked about hope. This is something that Donald Trump talked about as well, but he contrasted it in such a stark way, I think, that Obama obviously would never have done. Trump talked about sort of the carnage of the past, the devastation of the last 4 years, and how he would be this savior for America. So he's really, in some ways, setting himself up, in my mind, for that same potential for failure, I would argue, that maybe Obama had. He's creating these sky-high expectations for his next 4 years in the same way that as Obama did with his positive rhetoric at the time. Trump has his negative rhetoric of what happened in the last 4 years, but also saying that basically everything is going to change from this moment on. So I think that's something that really struck with me compared to being at the inauguration in 2008, that on the one hand, these are very, very different presidents. On the other hand, they are both setting themselves up with sky-high ambition and rhetoric, and we will see it's going to be a wild ride whether Donald Trump can deliver on his promises.
Chris, thank you very much indeed. That's Chris Cermak there in Washington, D.C. Well, now Carlota, who's still with me, and I will turn back to our panel here in London. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Patti Cohen, who's global economics correspondent at the New York Times. Patti and I met a few months ago, and subsequently she then joined our commentary team on Monocle. But from some kind of weird throw of the dice, I've never really been on the same shows as you, Patti. So
I know. I'm so happy we've finally coincided.
Finally, we're here together. And of course, Vincent McAviney, who's a journalist and a Monocle Radio regular politics commentator, and always a joy to have you with us, Vinny. We've all just been listening to the inauguration speech. I mean, you weren't in the newsroom. There was a pall of gloom hanging over. I'm wondering how you're feeling.
I still can't believe that he can't deliver a speech that someone else has written for him on a prompter with more energy. I mean, he was so flat in the delivery. And I think what's interesting is he's heading now, because of course they cancelled the outside event, he's heading now to an arena near the Capitol where they think about 20,000 of his supporters are going to be. And I think he'll be giving a much more Trump-esque sort of, bombast speech. This was, he just seemed a bit bored through this speech, although he made significant announcements on EVs, on the border. He also, in my mind, effectively declared war on Panama because he says he's going to take back the canal. That's the sovereign territory of another country. I mean, it's weird. I remember being more shocked by the first speech, his inauguration back in 2017, because there was a thought prevailing, which was, oh, this is stuff that he's said, in the campaign, and he won't actually do it. But that speech, I remember being quite a wake-up call for everyone that, no, the America First speech was, it was going beyond what he had said in some ways in the campaign. So it is a little bit strange. We're all sort of holding our breath to see this raft of executive orders, which will start to come into force in the next couple of hours. Will be fascinating to watch.
Patti, a little earlier, Carlota was talking about the US House at Davos and how it didn't actually have a name on it. I wondered if that was out of sheer embarrassment, and how you, as an American, feel watching this spectacle today.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a reporter, and so I really try to hold my own political views in check, and I don't really talk about them publicly. What I do think is interesting about the speech, though, is that I think it is evidence of something that people didn't do the first time around, which is take President Trump seriously. That a lot of times he makes statements that sound very outlandish and people kind of discount it and believe the things that they like and ignore the things that they don't. And I think this with the executive orders and citing a couple of really things that sound extreme, like you mentioned Panama, although I suppose taking back could be interpreted in a number of ways. But already, for instance, I was just looking, the border is going to close down. There's an app that the U.S. has that allows migrants to pre-register for appointments, and about 1,450 migrants have come in every day through that. That portal is just shut down now and says no no more appointments. So you're going to see changes, as he said, from day one.
But I mean, if you look at the actual figures, the figures that of migrants sent back under Biden were much higher than Trump in his previous term. I mean, I just wonder at what point people stop fact-checking all of this. He's saying this and nobody's going, actually, that's not factually correct.
Well, everybody does say not factually correct. And I think one of the most distressing things, certainly as a news reporter, that characterizes our age now is that, we live in different factual realities. And particularly in the U.S., because of the megaphone of Fox News. And I guarantee you that most of Trump's supporters have a very different view of what's happened, even recently, and as opposed to his opponents. I mean, even in this speech, he said the Chinese control the Panama Canal. That is incorrect. That's not factual. He said it before. It's been pointed out that that's not correct. Panama controls it. The Chinese do own ports along the side. But that hasn't stopped. Even when the inaccuracies are pointed out, that hasn't stopped them from repeating them.
And I think on that factual point, if you looked behind Melania Trump, who was dressed like a Norland nanny going to a funeral.
Mary Poppins.
Yeah, very odd choice of outfit. Sort of that hat, not sort of looking at anyone. It was very strange. But you had this row, which was extraordinary. The wealthiest men in the whole world. You had Elon Musk there, who at points looked like he was on one of his, as he has admitted to, prescribed ketamine trips. He was sort of like, really all over the place. You had, Jeff Bezos there, who obviously the boss of Amazon. You had Mark Zuckerberg there of Meta. All of these men have been, moving so close to Donald Trump, and it was so extraordinary to see them so close to him at the inauguration as well. And a large part of the fault of misinformation comes from them. You've got Elon Musk, who's allowed disinformation to spread rapidly over the last decade on Meta. He's now again sort of reversed, and he's taking away fact checkers if they ever worked at all. You've got Jeff Bezos, owner of the Washington Post, who we know suppressed an endorsement and potentially suppressed a recent political cartoon as well. And you've got Bezos, who is paying Melania Trump $40 million to do a documentary about moving back into the White House. I mean, that is probably the biggest paycheck in Hollywood this year of a talent that they're getting, and you can't say it's nothing more than bribery and a bung. And I just think it's incredible that America was founded on trying to get rid of a monarchy, and it just feels increasingly like it is sliding towards creating its first proper monarch with, these extraordinary powers, and particularly this power of pardon that I don't think has been framed correctly by the founders, because it feels like there is a potential in this second term that Donald Trump and members of his team can encourage people to perhaps break the law and simply say, don't worry, you'll get a pardon. If we see, for instance, a pardon of the January 6th, I think it will stop the breakdown of rule of law in America.
And Carlota, in Davos, as you say, there was a new climate report that came out just a couple of days ago. How does the drill, baby, drill comment land there?
The reaction in Davos, it has to be politically correct. Let's put it that way. And all eyes now are set to the end of the week, because Donald Trump is set to address the forum, the Congress Center, later on Thursday via video link, and notably no one from his administration is confirmed on the program, maybe because a vast majority is still going through the process of confirmation hearings. But the word on the street is that officials from WEF, and this was reported by Politico earlier today, officials from WEF are saying that they expect a broad footprint from the new administration to jet in later this week. And that will coincide when the conversation turns more into two issues that it's quite an irony of timing. It's when the last part of the week is when we talk mostly about rebuilding trust. And this is about press freedom and disinformation, and also about climate action. So if all of this aligns, the Trump administration, the new administration's people will be arriving when those themes are the ones being discussed in the Congress Center, which then will make for quite an interesting sessions to be part of and to watch.
Patti, I wonder how Europe's going to need to rethink its international economic relations.
So a couple of things I think it's important to point out. One is that Europe and perhaps less so publicly anyway, the UK, are clearly not happy with the turn that the Trump administration has set. Worried about support for Ukraine. They're worried about the security guarantee, about support for NATO. And that is all very troubling. But there was this European Council on Foreign Relations survey in November after the election that I just saw recently, and I think is very interesting, which is that Trump is incredibly popular around the world. So just in a sense, we're kind of in, this European bubble that looks very negatively on him. But there's a lot of governments that are very happy about Trump, people that like him. And as we saw, just as you were saying, all of the business, the most powerful tech people and business people, Wall Street stocks have been going up. So I do think, I think I wrote a story after the election and quoting one commentator who said, Europe's worst nightmare has come true.
Vinny, what about defence? I mean, obviously this is going to mean significant changes, or we think it will mean significant changes for Ukraine. So how is President Volodymyr Zelensky attempting to deal with Trump?
Well, we've seen even before the election last year, President Zelensky was making overtures to President Trump. When he went to UNGA in September, the UN General Assembly meeting, he had a private meeting with President Trump. He's tried to, at all times be positive towards him to try and make him understand that they are not the aggressors, that it's Russia that's the aggressor. And President Zelensky has made huge outreach. In every interview he's done since the election, he's sort of gone forward and sort of praised Trump. He very clearly last year made that decision. I think he thought that Trump would win, that he'd end up forced into some kind of a negotiation this year. And that's why I think they made that audacious land grab over the border in Russia so that they would have that as an extra token for the negotiations. It is a strategy. We know that the UK has got the UK and the European Union as well have set up units which are, directly to respond to President Trump and what sort of comes in from him, sort of rapid response units. I think there is a bit of a lesson as well, though, in something that's happened here in the UK in recent weeks. We know Elon Musk very closely aligned with Donald Trump, and Elon Musk really went after this grooming scandal, which is a historic scandal here in the UK, but particularly went on attack for Jess Phillips, who's a minister in the Home Office. And Jess Phillips is someone who's used to a lot of abuse. She's spent her career working with abused women, protecting them, sexual assault, all that kind of stuff. She is quite. She's someone who got a job in government that matches her skill set very well, and she's worked incredibly hard, and there's sort of cross-party recognition here for her. But Elon Musk went after her with the horrendous language, and I think initially the Starmer White House thought, the Starmer Prime Ministership team thought, we're not going to push too much on this. And then it got worse. And then the threat of abuse, Jess Phillips was already under significant threat. Now she's got even more protection and security, because that came really hard from Elon and supporters of Donald Trump. And it got to the point where they said, we've got to sort of push back on this. So they're all doing this dance of how they respond to him and what they can sort of get away with in terms of pushback.
Of course, and everybody being very polite. But here in Britain, of course, politeness really does matter. There's a new report in The Economist. It says that although Britain is generally becoming a more well-mannered society with less violence and vandalism, stats show that British people have become more sneaky, with some kinds of dishonesty being more accepted and more common than they used to be. Well, Carlota, I mean, you live both here and obviously you know a lot about Portugal. Would you say that was the case?
Well, if it's becoming a bit sneaky, maybe, Georgina. And does that get put down to the fact that younger generations are getting smarter, or what is the cause of this sneakiness? But now in all seriousness, I think there's a real conversation to be had about, the broken window syndrome. And this is, when vandalism attracts more vandalism. And in terms of Portugal and in terms of, well-mannered society, there were a lot of policies put in place in the late 90s, early 2000s to combat this. And this has been, quite effective. One of the key examples has been vandalism in public transport, which used to be quite high. And I'm talking about, graffiti and, just not a lot of manners in public transport. And the difference is quite significant over the past decade. So I think behavior is changing, but I'm not sure what the root cause of it is, because there are policies that can be put in place, and we know that in London there's been attempts to do that as well, but not always effective. So I'm not really sure if there's one solution that fits all.
I mean, Patti, there are now patterns showing increased levels of shoplifting and other types of quiet crime. Do you think people aren't scared? They're just not scared of being caught anymore?
I mean, I think two things are going on. In terms of the first, which you talked about, kind of politeness, I think there's a lot of things to blame on social media, but certainly that's one of them. And it even goes, Vinny, just back to the kind of comments and abuse that have become the norm. This toxic, really scary, violent attacks on social media that are so widely spread that it kind of give license to people. And when you see leaders, same with Donald Trump, for instance, who make those kind of similar threats, as well as Elon Musk, who's now at his right side, it legitimizes that. Secondly, I do feel like there's a breakdown, and I've seen it much more in my home city of New York, where shoplifting too. It's really interesting. You go into a drugstore now, they don't have them here at Duane Reade or at CVS. I guess it would be like Boots. And pretty much every single item in some shops is under lock and key, which is a very frustrating experience for the shopper. But literally, there was one of these large drugstores was closed.
Riverside Drive. I noticed that the other day. It was gone, and it was because people couldn't access the stuff.
They could not control the shop. The shoplifting, and the staff obviously was somewhat terrorized by that. So I do think there is kind of been a breakdown of civil society all around.
I mean, Vinny, are you seeing more evidence of this kind of crime?
I mean, I think I've definitely noticed an uptick in people pushing through tube barriers here in London, which is for the first sort of 10 years, I didn't really see it much. But I think definitely, I mean, part of this, of course, is down to the cost of living crisis. I don't think it's much about manners. It's down to the fact that we've had high levels of inflation, that wages have gone down, that we've got a lot of people, particularly people who are out of work and on benefits. Those benefits have not kept up with inflation. And I think that is a part of it. I think generally, Britain is a pretty good-mannered place. There is still a sense of wanting to do the right thing and wanting to be fair. I think there is a change, though. One of the things this article picks up on in The Economist is, people maybe on the self-checkout tills, which are being phased out now, putting, button mushrooms through, sort of chicken through as button mushrooms or whatever it is. I think maybe there's just a bit of a sense sometimes these days that the law isn't being applied as fairly as it should be. And I think we saw egregious examples in the pandemic of people cheating the system and seemingly getting away with it, like allegations about Michelle Mone, who was a sort of business millionaire here who siphoned off lots of money allegedly for PPE, which was never properly delivered or wasn't made right. And we saw lots of instances and the current government, the Keir Starmer government, is setting up has got a fraud office that's looking back at that period in particular. And so I think people just sort of feeling like the systems aren't working, and so why not take a little bit of advantage? But I always think it's a shame that that Britain, I mean, we've got a small one in the Cairngorms, but we're not a powerhouse in ski resorts, because we would have the best queues. Nothing winds me up more than skiing in France and those little shits going past you and not queuing properly.
Perhaps whether you get caught or not is in the stars. It seems to be more and more people, at least according to the Times, are turning to astrology to answer life's big questions. How are we seeing this manifest itself?
So, I'm a little bit skeptical of such surveys, but I will say what is not surprising, and you can see historically, is that during periods of extreme uncertainty, where there's a sense of crisis, a lot of transition, and clearly we're in a moment where the global order, as we've seen it for several decades, is changing in ways that are very hard to predict. There always has been a rise in superstition, astrology, conspiracy theories, spiritualism, all of that. And it's not only a kind of a British or an American phenomenon. It goes back to, the Russian Revolution, and you can see other examples before. So I think that's what's happening. We live in scary times, and you see it in many ways in terms of anxiety levels among younger people. And so this sense of not being in control is very frightening. And, an astrological sign or whatever, even a conspiracy theory in a way is more comforting that somebody's at least plotting this bad stuff, as opposed to the fact that this is completely random and we have no control over it.
Carlota, would you like to hear what your horoscope says about you today? I know you're a Gemini.
Absolutely. Anything to help me get through the week.
Okay, it says, what starts as a tiny spark of inspiration can leap into life today, given the right circumstances. So if you feel the need for some solo thinking time, make it happen. The best ideas are the ones that excite you most, even if they may not promise the most profits. Passion pushes past at least two barriers. I see global economics and snowy mountains in your future too. That last bit wasn't true. But maybe none of it was true, though. That's the thing, though, isn't it?
Carlota, you're at Davos, so, pitch that business idea. Maybe you'll get $1 billion unicorn given that reading.
Vinny, everything about you that already shines is enhanced even more by the sun, so you can dazzle everyone you meet. But in love terms, you know you need more than surface glitter, and this guides your heart towards someone quieter with an inner strength. In love already? Take time to listen. Try not to interrupt, it says.
That's
Do you believe?
A much better horoscope than Carlota's. If there's no romance
listen to yours, Patti.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Shining the light of the sun in your deep secret self is your key to taking one big step towards the future you want. You've been hiding a part of your personality, perhaps for a quiet life. You see, you wouldn't talk about your politics. And now you can let this show and feel the difference by tonight.
Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
We certainly will. Well, listen, I think my horoscope is actually saying you're going on a journey. 6 weeks of literary festivals across Asia and Australia loom. You're about to spend hours on an Air India flight to Calcutta, and you need to get out of the studio and start packing.
That seems a very custom-made reading.
That's it, therefore, for this edition of the Monocle Daily. A big thanks to my panellists today, Patti Cohen and Vincent McAviney, also to Carlota Rebelo and Cermak, who joined us at the top of the show. Today's show was produced by Monica Lillis and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Elliot Greenfield. And as I said, I am going to be away for a bit, but I will be checking in regularly on the road. I'm Georgina Godwin here in London for the meantime, and the Monocle Daily is back at the same time tomorrow. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.